Hello and welcome to another modelling video. This is Alan from the MontMarte YouTube with another model video. Today reviewing and experimenting with Mont Marte Paste creative texture. This is very well known in the art community as modelling paste, a very thick white style paint that you mix with a pigment coloured paint to build up texture on a canvas if you're brush painting. It has many uses in sculpting and other applications as it builds up texture. It's more known as a weathering paste in the modelling world, though sold for far higher costs in 10 to 50 millilitres with a little bit of sand or colour mixed in. To save a fair amount of money and not using these products, you could buy a very large tub of this to build up your dioramas or weathering textures or any sort of textures on your models. We'll create a diorama and we'll mix some texture paint as well. I don't think the brand is important. MontMarte is an Asian manufactured line of paints and art supplies. Some of them are very high quality, targeted at art students or hobbyists, that sort of thing. So they generally are on the cheaper end of the scale. Having a look at it cracked open, we can see that it is very thick, doesn't quite flow, and it's sort of the consistency of glue. Very easy to apply. We're going to first create a little bit of texture paint. With this one, we're going to mix some Tamiya acrylic paint with this paste. Just build up a layer of about 4 to 6 dollops. And we're going to mix in some of this sand and mix it in really thoroughly, and this is starting to build up the texture that I would expect in some of the Mr. Hobby weathering and texture sets, which can add in more sand if we want, even larger pebbles. And we could just apply it with a brush onto this bit of styrene, and you can see that we can build it up and make it pretty transparent or pretty thick. And this will be done obviously in layers due to how transparent. If we want a more solid color, we add a lot more pigmented paint. If we were weathering something like a Gundam, you could just lightly dry brush the legs, and it's leaving a little bit of sand or dirt on the bottom of the feet, and you just wipe off the excess with a tissue, as so, for something that looks pretty nice and subtle if you're more of the out-of-the-box plastic persuasion. When hand painting with a small brush, we can get some very subtle effects and attempt to cover certain areas or shapes, but as we see, it's not too easy to control, so we couldn't make an obvious shape like a square or a circle or anything, but you can add a large amount of material and then shape it and cut it away with a tool later, like a Q-tip or a toothpick, and just shape it up and move it around as you see fit, putting little circles and inscriptions and whatnot. Allow that to dry and put some paint on it to see what was achieved. Again, with the fine brush, if we have something detailed like a model or something, you can dry brush very fine amounts on the edging of armor or components and get the appearance of distorted armor or metal, battle damage. Or if we were to detail that area, instead of being very smooth, it would be pretty streaky So we'll put a large amount of paint, and we'll just keep going down to create streaks that would build up in a wash or something, while trying not to look like brush strokes once airbrush is applied over. With a larger brush, we're able to just mount on as much as we want and create a bit of something like a wargaming base diorama or something, and create the illusion of elevated earth. Though what would be very popular would be something like ocean waves or water effect, and just be quite playful with it. It would probably be most convincing to do water and then paint it. So we're just going to rough it up quite a bit, paint it blue and give it some white highlights randomly. For cleanup, you could just swirl it in a bit of solvent of your choice, or rinse it under a tap with water and wipe off the excess for future use. It is very gentle on your brushes, so you don't have to cheap out there. If the build-up is very thick, the drying time is going to be very slow and varies due to how much you apply. I wouldn't touch anything for half an hour, but maybe a few hours would be best before putting more layers or paint. Here are the 3 painted tile examples. Tile 1, red paint and a wash. I've made a circle, a square and a mound. It's pretty hard to control, but you can get some very basic shapes. I would not consider it as sculptural detail, especially mechanical. Organic, maybe, in a fleshy, morbid way, but all sorts of other effects for sure. Number 2 was the very thick paint strokes to make almost a water wave effect. This was dabbed in less than a minute sculpturally, and only 3 layers of paint haphazardly shaded to make water waves. Not my best attempt. With a bit of practice it'll look a little more realistic, though this is the cheapest method of modelling water for waterline ships and other science fiction subjects. And mixing it with sand, painting it and adding a wash, we've just got a very simple textured paint for mass wargaming bases by adding paint, adding sand and direct application. So that's a very cheap, very affordable mass way. And with the same texture paint, we've got a very basic weathering paste texture on a Gundam component, which looks pretty simple as a basic weathering method. Now I'm going to try to have a go at sculpturally making a diorama base. The modelling paste struggles to build up surfaces any higher in one coat than 2 to 3 mil. We're going to apply a second very affordable product from the same place, air drying clay, which is sort of like a 2-part putty, very thick, and you can do like a very basic inferior ceramic design or sculpture. We're going to make organic diorama shapes, and then we're going to further texture it with the modelling paste and some sand. At this stage we're going to do more sculpting. 2-part putties can be very expensive, as well as other mediums, and from cheap budget art shops and $2 stores I've bought some air drying clay. The miniature here is attached with a magnet and will not be going anywhere. We'll make an impression for the dog as it's quadrupedal. We're going to fill a little bit of putty into the helmet to fit on the figure's head. You can see that it pushes around sort of the consistency of blue tack, or a much softer 2-part putty, and it reasonably has an okay amount of adhesion. With wet fingers you can make a very, very smooth surface, though it will shrink and crack after drying. At that stage you could also use traditional filling methods. Molded on beautifully, The bottom end can be glued, cemented at a later stage. Let's allow this to dry and harden. For maximum adhesion, PVA glue has been applied to bond between the plastic and the clay. Spread out and a bunch of clay pulled out. For attraction of the eyes, I put a mound in the centre and spread it out to the edges, which makes it look like the dead centre is elevated and everything else is lower. This will not look very good, and especially with the feet on the edges, there's going to be a gap between the ground and the feet. Putty was applied underneath that and spread out to make an elevation with a higher lick to the right of the camera, giving the illusion of a slope. Now we've impressed the dog on the soft putty or air drying clay. Allow this to dry for 24 hours or longer. We pushed in a little bit of fine pebbles and a bit of debris to make it look like it's partially buried. Now we will not touch until cured. Marked out the areas of the footprints as to not add extra rocks or detail. Going back to the modelling paste, we're able to start doing the finer and gradual build up among the pebbles and the rocks that's been put on there, and add a finer texture around the feet that we've previously marked in. So it can look like some items are partially buried. A lot more subtle builds up of dirt and terrain elevation from the previous brushing. With a toothpick and PVA wood glue, I'm picking out the raised area details to cover, to be sprinkling some turf, sand, all sorts of effects that will only appear where it's been applied. Toothpick works nicely as I've got very fine control, but if I was to do a much larger area, I'd use a Q-tip or even a disposable paintbrush, sponge, that sort of thing. It's whatever appropriate, but I normally only do small vignettes and dioramas. And we just pinch a bit of sand and slowly sprinkle it on. There's a bit of flock in there. Pinch a bit of sand with a little higher grit content, and we get a nice even coverage. Once done, tip upside down to shake off the excess, and that's pretty nice so far. With a coat of primer, I used the Mr. Surfacer 500 as a micro filler to level out any faults. We could see how beautifully the ground elevation is, and it's very gradual between the sculpting clay and the modelling paste mixed in with the PVA glue and sand for dirt texture. It's interconnected with the footprints where the figures are going to be set into place at a later date, and drenched around with some larger rocks, a bit of debris and some shell casings. And here is the final results. After the flat surface and the build-up of clay, we've got basic elevation, but there's far more finer variations you can't see from fingerprints and the moulding of the fingers. Little dents and whatnot, as well as footprints to anchor in any of our miniatures, and the lovely bit of metal. The metal has a little deformation and dents built from the modelling paste, as well as indenting all of this fine gravel and grit. Mixing up multiple tones of paint and the flock gives enough of an illusion to the eye of natural scenic instead of something that's patterned or symmetrical. Where if we look here for just a very basic flat surface, it breaks up the surface, but only at a sub-level where it's still the same plane, and it's just the modelling paste mixed in with some sand. So this is an effort that only took about 4 minutes, where this effort was a number of sessions over a couple of hours. you can see the quality of just having a base with a mono color and mono texture to multi. Looking at the other, these two, the exact same can be applied. You sculpt a little something thicker with clay, and then you put further detail to make something alien. And the same with waves. You can sculpt some sort of basic waves and then give it a further texture than this flat square. All in all, very happy how this project has turned out, and recommend modelling paste and clay as a medium to play with in your hobby for dioramas plus weathering effects. Thank you very much for watching. As always, until next time, stay tuned for further content. We'll catch you guys next time. Have a look at the description section for social media links and other activities. The second YouTube channel, phDManChild, has quite a bit of content and frequent activity, including some behind the scenes of my Con processes. See you later.